Hello and welcome to the play novel for Throne and Liberty. This is from Episode 1, Chapter 1, The Sandworm Lair. Arriving at the ravine leading to the Sandworm Lair, Clay kept looking about nervously. Rowan, Gerald, cover me. Don't forget, I'm a wizard. The biggest sandworm is going to come for me. Clay and Lunar had been researching devices capable of detecting mana stones or traps set by arcane wizards. And after much trial and error, they had finally succeeded in building a magical detector. They were hopelessly short of sandworm poison sacs, however, before the device could be mass-produced and distributed to all the guilds. So, they and other members of the resistance had come well prepared to hunt for more. The lair was crawling with sandworms, however, but what was notorious even among local hunters and the most experienced resistant members. Small wonder Clay was nervous, considering that sandworms lurk underground only to burst out suddenly and target their prey according to their mana. However, the sandworms that had appeared so far had only attacked other resistance members, so Clay had been left to deal with worker spiders. The only poison sacs Clay had was from a small sandworm that only shot out when Lunar Zero was passing by some rocks, only to be promptly slain and its sac cut out by Gerald. Looks like the Lunar Zero mana is stronger than yours, Clay. Are you sure you're a villainous wizard? Ha! Looks like the Lunar Zero's mana is stronger than yours, Clay. Are you sure you're a vanilla wizard? Trail wagged a small finger, teasing Clay. Picking off sandworms one by one, they'll advance deeper into their lair without Teal wagged their small finger, teasing Clay. Picking off sandworms one by one and advancing deeper into their lair without encountering further trouble for a while, lulled into a security by brief respite, Teal wagged a small finger, teasing Clay. Picking off sandworms one by one, they advanced deeper into the lair without encountering further trouble for a while. Lulled into a security by a brief respite, Clay expounded on his poison sac research with Lunar Zero and Teal as he walked. Roan and Gerald walked slightly apart from them without speaking. Gerald matched his step to Rowan's, even while keeping an eye out for the sandworms that might strike at any minute. His attentions were wasted on Rowan, however, who took no notice. Then, arriving at the plateau at the end of the ravine, Clay's party caught up with the resistance members who had covered their routes. The other groups showed off their poison sacs and started swapping stories. Clay's group gazed around in their single poison sac and sighed. All of a sudden, Lunar Zero snatched up a sac. It started racing towards the rocks in the edges of the plateau. Mana nest, Lunar Zero. Give that back. It's the only one we've got. Clay had begun running after Lunar Zero when all of a sudden a tremor shook the ground. Clay lost his balance and tumbled head over heels. A gaping hole appeared in the middle of the plateau, sucking in all the sand from around. The resistance members struggled, but were slowly sucked into the hole. Thanks to his fall, and while chasing Lunar Zero, Clay was some distance away from it, and he began looking around for Rowan and Gerald. Clay! Help! A familiar voice rose out of the den. Clay located the sound to find Gerald holding onto Rowan's right hand as she was being sucked into the ground. Gerald braced himself and pulled as hard as he could, but he was no match for the colossal force pulling everything underground. Clay ran over to help. However, Rowan had already disappeared into the sand. Only her right hand glove remained in Gerald's hand. Rowan! No! Gerald raised his voice in anguish. The monster roar rang out at the same time. The next thing they knew, the biggest sandworm any of them had ever seen had burst out of the ground, colliding with the monster's shell. Gerald was thrown back and knocked unconscious. It's Queen Blender! Ah, run! Queen Blender towered above them, taller than the lighthouse of the Caster's town, as it shook its massive body. Sandworm larva jumped out of the cracks of its shell, and the larva clung to the bodies of the fleeting resistance members, wriggling and spewing their venom. "Gerald, wake up!" Clay shook Gerald awake. As soon as he opened his eyes, Gerald was on his feet, swinging his sword like a madman, slaying larvae this way and at that as he searched for Rowan. Clay and Teal looked after those who had managed to crawl out of the pit, and the rest of the resistance gripped their weapons and attacked Queen Blender, who, after having already devoured dozens of humans, opened her gaping jaw and rammed the ground with tremendous force. The entire ravine shook as if struck by an earthquake. "Kill that thing before it absorbs all the mana from the victims. It must have a weakness." Clay shouted urgently as the resistance members rallied. Queen Blender doubled over and retreated into the hole. Presently, all. Clay shouted urgently, and the resistance member rallied. Queen Blender doubled over and retreated into the hole. Presently, all was silent. The remaining members of the resistance huddled far away from the terrible pit, shaking. It seemed that there was no way any human could defeat such a monster. That was when the ground shook heavily again, and Queen Blender's huge body appeared, shrieking in pain. The sandworm thrashed about. Violent light shone from the cracks on its underbelly. Gerald instinctively sensed that it had to be the monster's weak spot. "Aim for the shining cracks in its shell," he yelled. Gerald rushed in, shouting, and the resistance members began targeting the monster's underbelly. Crack. Crack. Attacking in her weak spot, Queen Blender's body began to split open, writhing in agony, and the monster threw her body in all directions. A violent phoenix emerged from the sandworm's cracked shell. Inside the glowing phoenix was Rowan. The Rowan in front of them was radiating mana of incredible force. Overwhelmed by the power he sensed, Clay could not take a single step towards her. And with that, that concludes Chapter 1, The Sandworm Lair. I think we're going to wrap it up here. In this case, there are additional chapters that you can find, and the link will be in the description below. Let me know if you'd like me to go ahead and create videos about these additional chapters, and I'll be happy to do so. Very curious about your feedback, and I hope you guys enjoyed. And that's going to be it, guys. Hopefully I'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. But until then, take care.